The crowd roared like a living beast, a single, throbbing mass of hunger and heat rising from the stone belly of the Colosseum. Dust swirled in golden spirals across the arena floor where two gladiators circled each other, their shadows long and sharp beneath the afternoon sun. But the people weren't cheering for the clash of steel, no. Today they roared for one man, Valerius Drecon, champion, executioner, myth. He stood in the center of the arena, chest rising and falling beneath bronzed muscles scarred by years of combat. A crimson cloak snapped behind him, the only softness in his entire silhouette. The other gladiator, bigger, newer, terrified, lunged wildly. A mistake. Valerius stepped aside with calm precision, his blade slicing through the air and ending the fight before the crowd had even taken its next breath. The defeated man collapsed, dust rising around him in a soft, mournful cloud. But Valerius didn't raise his sword for the kill. His eyes moved instead to the Emperor's private box, where a figure stood behind the silk curtains, watching him. Studying him, Livia Cassian, the Emperor's niece, a noble woman, with the bearing of a statue and eyes full of storms. Though hidden behind the curtain, Valerius could feel her there, like a heat pressed to his spine. She had been watching him for months, watching him win, watching him survive the impossible, watching him as if she were trying to remember a truth she wasn't supposed to know, and she wasn't the only one. Behind a wooden gate, chained and guarded by soldiers, stood a line of captives. Spoils taken from Rome's recent campaigns. Among them was a young woman whose quiet presence had stirred the entire ludus into whispers, Amara of Numidia. A healer, a prisoner, a woman whose calm dignity held more power than any sword. Valerius had met her only once, by accident, when she was brought to treat an injured gladiator. Their conversation had been brief, but her words had struck him with ruthless clarity. "Victory brings chains of its own kind, Valerius. You may win every battle in the arena, but someone else is winning the war over your soul." He had not forgotten, nor had the Emperor. For Rome believed that victors had the right to everything taken from the conquered, land, treasures and even hearts. But the secret truth in the Colosseum was darker. Gladiators, who rose too high, whose fame threatened to eclipse the Emperor's own light, were expected to display obedience in every possible way, publicly, privately, brutally. And the highest form of obedience? The one Rome never wrote in scrolls but enforced through whispers and punishments? What a champion chose to do with a captive lover. The crowd believed it was simple. A show of dominance, a reward, a spectacle. But reality was far more complicated and far more dangerous than the bloodthirsty audience imagined. As the cheers rolled like thunder, Valerius lowered his blade. The editor of the games shouted the formal command. "The victor chooses the fate of the defeated." The crowd chanted his name. "Drakon! Drakon! Drakon!" The sound pounding like war drums, but Valerius wasn't thinking of the fallen man. His eyes drifted again, to the shadows near the captives, to Amara, who stood watching him with a calm, unreadable expression, and, for a moment, just a moment, the world shrank to the space. Between their gazes, something unspoken passed. There, recognition, warning, or perhaps destiny stirring from a long sleep. Then a horn sounded. In the moment shattered, 2 soldiers approached him. Bowing deeply, "Champion," one said, "the Emperor summons you. There is a matter concerning the Numidian healer, and your expected duties after victory." Valerius stiffened. So that was it! The summons he had long feared. He wiped the blood from his blade, his expression unreadable. "Take me to him." As he followed the soldiers through the cool stone corridors beneath the arena, distant cheers still echoing above, he felt a shift in the air, an omen. Something was coming. Something that would test his strength far more than any battle in the sands. For there were things the gladiators whispered about in the dead of night, things they claimed happened to the captives chosen for Rome's most celebrated warriors. Some said the victors were forced to prove their loyalty through cruelty. Others claimed the Emperor used pairings to break both gladiator and captive, ensuring neither could rise against Rome. And some swore the truth was even darker still, an unwritten ritual that bound victor and captive in a pact of suffering designed to entertain only one person: the Emperor himself. Valerius had never believed in such tales, until now. As he approached the Emperor's chamber, the torches flickered violently, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. The heavy bronze door creaked open. The Emperor reclined upon his cushioned seat, eyes sharp as a hawk, and beside him, silent, guarded, watching, stood Amara. Her wrists were bound, her face calm, her eyes bright with something unbreakable. The Emperor gestured lazily. "Champion Draken," he said, voice dripping with amusement. "You have entertained Rome well today, and now we must discuss what you will do with your spoil of victory." Valerius clenched his jaw, because behind the Emperor's mocking smile, he finally understood the truth. The unthinkable thing gladiators did to their captive lovers was not an act of desire. It was an act of command. And refusal was a death sentence. For both. Amara lifted her chin, meeting Valerius's eyes with fearless clarity. "Whatever they demand of you," she murmured softly, "you do not have to lose yourself to survive it." But Valerius knew the Emperor was watching every breath they exchanged. The real battle had just begun. The Emperor leaned back, fingers drumming on the arm of his gilded chair, his gaze sliding between Valerius and Amara like a blade testing where to cut. The chamber smelled of burning myrrh, melting wax, and something darker. The metallic scent of fear radiating from the guards who stood rigid along the walls. "Champion," the Emperor said, voice smooth as poisoned wine, "the people adore you. They worship you, and that is a problem." Valerius stood tall, his blood-stained armor still gleaming, but he did not speak. Anything he said now could be twisted against him. Amara, bound and guarded, remained silent as well, though her eyes followed the Emperor with the calm of someone who had already lived through worse. "That is why," the Emperor continued, "Rome must be constantly reminded that you are not a god, but a servant, a servant." The word burned more than any wound Valerius had ever taken in the arena. "And so," the Emperor said, smiling cruelly, "your role is simple. Tonight, after the feast, you will entertain my guests with a performance befitting a conqueror. You will demonstrate what Rome's victors do with their captive lovers." A hush fell heavy in the room. Valerius did not flinch. Amara did not look away. The Emperor rose slowly, stepping down from his platform, until he stood mere inches from the gladiator. He was smaller, physically unimpressive next to Valerius's broad frame, but the soldiers behind him gave his presence the weight of inevitability. "You will do this," he whispered, "because Rome must see your obedience. They must see you take what is yours. They must see dominance, desperation, victory." His eyes flicked to Amara, and suffering. Amara exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Valerius's voice finally broke the silence. "And if I refuse?" The Emperor's smile didn't change, but the room seemed to grow colder. "Then she dies," he said. "And your tongue goes to the dogs, so you can never speak your defiance again. But don't worry, champion. Your hands will still be useful. Rome does enjoy a good punishment." Valerius's jaw tightened until the muscle ached. Not fear, not submission. Something sharper, rage buried beneath stone. The Emperor turned away, waving dismissively. "Prepare him. Prepare her. Tonight, Rome learns the price of victory." The guards didn't hesitate. Two seized Valerius by the arms, not because they could overpower him, but because they were ordered to. Three moved toward Amara, unlocking her restraints but replacing them with fresh chains, heavy and ornate, like jewelry meant for a festival. But Amara didn't resist. She walked forward with her chin high, her dignity untouched. She was a healer, not a warrior, yet she carried a kind of strength the Emperor feared. And perhaps that was why she had been chosen. Breaking her would mean breaking Valerius too. As they were escorted from the chamber, Valerius risked a glance at her. She whispered, barely moving her lips, "Whatever happens, I'm not afraid of you. Only of becoming the weapon they want you to be." Valerius swallowed hard. "I will not harm you. You may not have a choice." He didn't answer, because she was right. The sun dipped below the Colosseum's walls as servants rushed through corridors lit by wavering torchlight. The feast hall was already being prepared, tables overflowing with figs, roasted lamb, wine, and gold plates polished until they shone like small suns. Beneath the arena, Valerius was taken to the baths, where 2 attendants scrubbed the blood from his skin. His reflection in the rippling water looked like a stranger, a warrior carved from stone, yet trapped like an animal. "Does she mean something to you?" One attendant dared to ask. Valerius's glare silenced him instantly, but the question lingered. Did she? Amara, meanwhile, was taken to a different chamber, one used for entertainments. Silks and cushions were arranged around a raised platform, and musicians were already tuning their lyres. Servants braided her hair with golden threads and painted her hands with henna-like patterns meant to mark her as a conquered beauty. One whispered shakily, "I'm sorry." "They said we must prepare you for him," Amara answered gently. "This is not your cruelty. You only fear surviving." The servant began to cry. Even dressed as a captive, Amara refused to lose her humanity. And that terrified the emperor far more than any rebellion. When the feast began, nobles filled the hall, drunk on wine and expectation. They gossiped eagerly. "Have you heard? The champion will take his prize before us all. A Numidian beauty, they say. Rome should see how heroes are made and how captives are broken." Valerius entered last. The hall fell silent. He walked like a shadow cast from iron, every muscle coiled. His eyes swept the room with cold calculation. But when they landed on Amara, standing on the platform, chains draped like necklaces, they softened by a fraction. The emperor raised his cup. "Tonight," he proclaimed, "Rome witnesses what happens when victory meets desire." The crowd cheered. Valerius did not move. "Begin," the emperor ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. And that was the moment everything inside Valerius snapped taut as a bowstring. Because if he obeyed, Amara would be destroyed. If he disobeyed, she would be killed, unless he found a third path. A path no gladiator had ever dared to take. Her eyes met his, steady, trusting. And in that instant Valerius chose. Not obedience, not rebellion, a deception, a performance, a lie so convincing it might save them both. He stepped onto the platform, slowly, deliberately. The crowd leaned forward. Angry, Amara held her breath. Valerius reached for her wrists and whispered so only she could hear, "Forgive me. What I do next is not what they think." Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers. "Do what you must," she whispered. Valerius lifted his head, expression turning dark, calculated, dangerous, a mask. The emperor smiled, the crowd erupted, but none of them knew the truth. The unthinkable thing Rome expected him to do was exactly the thing he would use to deceive them. The platform seemed to breathe beneath Valerius's feet, every grain of polished wood holding the weight of Rome's hunger. The nobles leaned forward like wolves circling the scent of blood, their jeweled hands clutching goblets, as though afraid to blink and miss the spectacle. Amara stood before him, draped in silken chains that glinted under torchlight, ornaments of captivity meant to humiliate. Yet she held her spine straight, her chin high. Her dignity was the only thing in the hall that the emperor could not command. Valerius raised her wrists as if appraising his prize. The crowd roared in delight, but the emperor watched more closely. Too closely. Valerius knew he had only moments to execute his deception. He slid a hand down Amara's arm, fingers brushing her wrist gently, but to the crowd, the gesture looked possessive, dominant. The murmurs intensified. A nobleman shouted drunkenly, "Show us how a champion claims his spoils!" Valerius ignored them. His voice dropped, low and urgent, barely a whisper. "They expect brutality. I will give them theater. Stay with me." Amara met his gaze, eyes steady despite the danger pressing in on all sides. "Then play your role," she murmured. "I will play mine." The emperor raised a brow as Valerius circled her slowly, the way predators circle prey. But his steps were deliberate, measured, not to frighten her, but to shield her from view of the guards for a few brief seconds. In those seconds, he slipped a small object he had hidden in his belt, a pin carved from bone, into her palm. So tiny it was invisible, unless one knew to look. Her eyes widened subtly, a tool. A chance, a future, but they did not speak of it. The timing had to be perfect. The crowd, oblivious, howled approval. "Closer! Take her! Prove your loyalty to Rome." Valerius placed a hand on Amara's waist. The touch looked forceful, but his fingers trembled, not with desire, but fury at the role he was forced to play. Her breath hitched, not from fear, but from understanding. He stepped behind her, leaning close enough for his whisper to brush the shell of her ear like a ghost. When I lift my hand... Fall. She nodded once, barely perceptible. Valerius slid his hand up her spine, the gesture appearing slow and sensual to the audience. But every inch was choreographed. No one noticed her fingers working behind her, testing the chains. Testing the pin, the Emperor lifted his goblet, smirk forming. Excellent, he said. Continue, Valerius forced a smile. A cruel smile. A gladiator's smile, then he raised his hand dramatically, as though preparing to seize her hair, and Amara collapsed. The room gasped. She fell with perfect grace, head turning just enough to avoid striking the wood, her body crumpling in a way that appeared fragile, overwhelmed, conquered. To the crowd, it looked like she had swooned from fear or submission. To Valerius, it was the signal. He knelt beside her, letting his expression shift into one of mock frustration. Get up, he growled loudly for the audience, but his hands pressed firmly to her back, steadying her, shielding the movement of her fingertips as she unlocked her left wrist with the hidden pin. The clasp loosened. Just a hair. Good. Just enough. One of the Emperor's advisors laughed cruelly. Break her spirit, champion. Valerius's heart hammered. If the Emperor saw the truth, they were both dead. He lifted Amara's chin with one hand, giving the room a display of dominance they demanded. Yet his thumb brushed her jaw tenderly. Reassuringly, her lips parted slightly. Is the plan working? She whispered so low he felt the words more than heard them. So far. Then keep going. Valerius angled her body so her unchained wrist fell beneath her hair, invisible to the crowd. Her fingers slipped to the second clasp. The Emperor leaned forward. Your captive seems spirited, he remarked. Perhaps you need to show her the consequences of resistance. Valerius bowed his head. My Emperor, he said. Allow me to continue. Permission granted. He lifted Amara gently, but made it appear rough, his grip tight to the audience, soft to her. Their bodies were close now, faces inches apart, a tableau of forced intimacy, and in that closeness, she breathed. One more lock. Valerius shifted his stance, blocking the guard's view completely for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, the chain snapped open. Amara was no longer bound. Not truly, but she didn't run. Not yet, because they still needed a spark. A distraction. A moment to ignite chaos. The Emperor clapped slowly, amused. Good, he murmured. Now show us the moment Rome will remember. Valerius's mind raced. He could not strike the Emperor. He could not flee with Amara, not with 50 guards at the doors, but he could start a performance so shocking that no one would see the truth behind it until it was too late. He tightened, his grip on Amara's shoulders, not to restrain her, but to give her balance. Trust me, he breathed, her eyes sharpened. Do it. Valerius seized her waist and lifted her, not in violence, but in a dramatic, staged display of possession. The crowd gasped, thrilled, and then Amara slammed her palm into his chest, not hard enough to harm, but hard enough to look like defiance. A collective gasp filled the hall. The Emperor shot to his feet. Did she just... Valerius roared loudly, a sound of rage so convincing it froze the nobles in place. He spun Amara toward himself, eyes blazing, arm raised as though to strike. The crowd went silent. The Emperor leaned forward, breath held, and then Valerius bellowed, She is not broken yet! The hall exploded into excitement. People shouted, clapped, stomped. In the chaos, no one saw Amara slip the chains from her wrists. No one saw her hide them beneath the cushions. No one saw her fingers curl around the bone pin like a dagger, and no one, not even the Emperor, realized that the performance had just transformed into a rebellion hidden in plain sight. Valerius lowered his arm slowly, his expression fierce, but his whisper carried a promise. Tonight we begin our escape. The hall trembled with noise. Cheers, drunken shouts, fists pounding the tables in savage rhythm. Nobles leaned forward, delighted, believing they were witnessing a brutal dance between conqueror and captive. None of them realized the truth, and a gladiator and a healer had just begun a rebellion under their noses. Valerius released a controlled growl, pacing around Amara as if deciding her fate. His performance kept every gaze pinned to them. No one wanted to miss the supposed climax Rome demanded. But beneath the table near the Emperor's seat, something else stirred. A small, leather-wrapped pouch, dropped earlier by Valerius during the bow, now lay unnoticed. Inside it was a powder stolen from the Ludus's apothecary, a powder harmless alone, but when mixed with wine, it became smoke, blinding, choking, panic-inducing smoke. Valerius only needed time. A few minutes. Nothing more. He turned to the Emperor, voice booming with well-practiced fury. "My Emperor," he barked, "permit me to continue this lesson where victory is born, in the arena." The hall buzzed with excitement. The nobles loved the idea. The Emperor raised a brow, intrigued. "You wish to finish this spectacle before the eyes of the people?" Valerius bowed his head in forced humility. "Yes, Caesar. Let Rome see the true cost of defiance." Amara's heartbeat hammered at her ribs, but she remained perfectly still, eyes lowered, the image of a captive prepared for fate. The Emperor lifted his goblet. "Very well," he said, amusement curling his lips. "Take her. The arena awaits." Valerius seized Amara's arm. The crowd roared, and in that roar, no one noticed Amara, slipping the bone pin into her braided hair, now a weapon far more useful than a chain. The guards escorted them out of the hall, through the corridor leading to the underground. Tunnels of the Colosseum. Torches crackled, shadows danced, and every step tightened Valerius's jaw. They were still too exposed. "Too watched," he whispered without turning his head. "When we reach the gatehouse, run. I will draw them." Amara's answer was steady. "I don't leave without you. A dangerous promise, a beautiful one." They reached the iron-barred passage that led directly to the hypogum, the underbelly of the arena. Here, torches burned low and the guards thinned out. Two stood at the final gate. Valerius shifted, preparing to strike. But Amara moved first. Her hands rose as if adjusting her hair. Then she spun, jamming the bone pin into the first guard's throat without hesitation. He choked, collapsing. The second guard froze, stunned. Valerius drove his fist into the man's jaw, dropping him instantly. For a brief heartbeat, silence held the tunnel. Then Valerius looked at her, astonished. "You didn't hesitate." Amara wiped the blood from her fingers. "Slavers killed my village," she said softly. Hesitation died with them. He nodded once, deeply, respectfully. They pushed open the gate and slipped into the vast darkness of the hippogum. Beneath the arena floor, the air was thick with the smell of old blood, animals, rusting chains, and damp stone. Cages lined the walls. Pulleys and trapdoors hung from the ceiling like the bones of a giant. Valerius knew every inch of this place. He led her through narrow passages until they reached a storage alcove. In here, racks of weapons lay ready for the next day's spectacle. He grabbed two short swords, handing her one. "You know how to use this?" "No," she said. "But I learn fast." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Above them, distant footsteps echoed. Guards, searching. They needed the smoke. They needed the chaos. Valerius pulled out a second pouch from a hidden niche in the wall. "Keep behind me," he ordered. "No," she corrected softly. "We stay together." Before he could argue, the horn of the arena boomed, 3 long blasts. A signal. The Emperor had grown suspicious. Time was gone. Valerius took the pouch, tore it open, and tossed its contents into a torch. The flame hissed, flared, and exploded into a billowing cloud of thick grey smoke rolling through the hypogum like a rising storm. Above, shouts erupted. Coughing, confusion, the beast was awakened. Valerius grabbed Amara's hand. "Now we go." They sprinted through the labyrinth of cages as the smoke surged upward, through the trapdoors, and into the arena. The crowd's screams thundered above them, panic spreading like wildfire. They reached the lift platform, used to raise gladiators into the arena. "It's our only way out," Valerius said. Amara leaped onto the platform with him. Together, they threw their weight onto the counterweights. The mechanism groaned, lifted. The platform surged upward, wooden beams rattling. Seconds later, they burst into the arena. Smoke choked the air. Nobles fled in every direction. The Emperor's guards shouted, struggling to contain the chaos, and there in the imperial box, The Emperor himself stared down, furious, realizing he'd been played. Valerius looked up and met his gaze. For the first time, the Emperor looked afraid. The platform descended behind them with a crash. Archers lined the far edge of the arena, shouting, aiming. Amara grasped Valerius's wrist. "This way," she yelled, pointing to the broken gate used earlier to drop animals into the sand. The smoke had blown it open. They ran. Arrows sliced the air behind them. One grazed Valerius's shoulder. He didn't slow. Imara didn't let go. They burst through the broken gate into the outer corridor. A sloping ramp led upward, toward daylight, freedom. The city streets. But halfway up the ramp, a line of Imperial guards blocked the exit. Amara tightened her grip on the sword. Valerius exhaled once, deeply. Then he stepped forward. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Amara shook her head. Together the guards charged. Valerius met them like a storm. His blade flashed, striking with the precision that had made him Rome's greatest champion. Imara stayed close, using her dagger-like pin and short sword to keep enemies at bay. Her movements swift and instinctive. They became a single force, one body, one will, one promise. The last guard fell. The ramp opened to the outside world, a night sky streaked with smoke rising from the Colosseum. They stumbled onto the street, breathless. Behind them, alarms rang through the city. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Valerius turned to her. "This is our only chance," he said. "If we go separate ways." Amara grabbed his hand fiercely. "No, I will not survive this world alone." "And neither will you." He stared at her, this healer, this captive, this woman who had become a warrior in a single night. "Then together," he said, voice rough. "Until the end, until freedom," she corrected. They melted into the shadows of Rome's alleyways as soldiers poured into the streets searching for them, the champion and the captive, the gladiator and the healer, the man and the woman who made the Colosseum burn, and though Rome would hunt them for years, their story, their defiance, their escape would become legend.